The wagon stopped at the Larkins' gate just as sundown bled out over the pasture, and no one in Redwash mistook a dusk visit from Wade Mercer for kindness. He sat high on the seat in a black hat and dust-caked coat, broad as a gatepost, still as stone. Men called him Ruthless because he did the things gentler men only threatened. He had burned rustlers out of canyon camps, driven thieves off waterholes with a rifle across his knees, and buried 2 brothers who had ridden at him laughing. Yet that evening he had come for something uglier than revenge. Inside the house, Ruth Larkin heard the wagon settle and tightened her hand around the tin cup she was drying. Her father only went that quiet when a bad choice had already become a done one. At the kitchen table, her little brother Caleb slept with his cheek on his sleeve. In the bedroom beyond, her mother coughed into a rag she tried to hide whenever the blood came. The lamp bent in the draught. The whole house looked tired enough to collapse without warning. Elias Larkin stepped off the porch. Wade did not climb down. He only looked toward the house and said, "You sent word. I need the money." Elias sounded like a board splitting. "And the girl?" The words struck the yard like a shot. Ruth stood still. For one breath she hoped the wind had twisted what she heard into something monstrous. Then her father glanced toward the kitchen window, and shame flashed over his face. Not marriage, not work, a trade. Not even the chickens stirred beneath the porch at that. At 19, Ruth had been called lame, burdensome, useless. Her right leg had dragged since birth, and because she could not ride hard or swing a scythe all day, the town had long ago decided she was the weight the family would carry until it could not. She had worn those judgments the way fence posts wore storms, but hearing her own value weighed in dollars beneath her mother's window broke something deeper than pride. Her mother called from the bedroom. "Ruth?" Ruth carried the cup in. Martha Larkin lay against thin pillows, pale as flour, hair damp at the temples. When she saw Ruth's face, fear sharpened her eyes at once. "Who is it?" "Mr. Mercer." Martha tried to rise. A coughing fit bent her double. Dark spots bloomed on the rag in her hand. "Don't," Ruth whispered. But Martha clutched her wrist. "Your father said he found a way to pay for medicine. Tell me he didn't send for Wade Mercer." Ruth could not answer. Outside, a purse clinked. Elias said, low and cracked, "You promised she'd be looked after." "Better than she is here," Wade answered. Martha closed her eyes. For a moment she looked older than the bed beneath her. Ruth walked back through the kitchen before her mother could see her shaking. Caleb slept on. That hurt worst of all. At the door she paused, then stepped into the cold evening. Both men turned. A horse stamped in the traces. A loose shutter tapped. Coyotes started up in the far hills. Ruth came down the steps carefully, her bad leg dragging a crescent in the dirt. Wade noticed. No disgust crossed his face. Only something old. "How much?" she asked. Elias flinched. "Ruth, go inside." "How much?" Wade took a purse from his coat. 200 now, another 50 if you arrive quiet." Enough for medicine, seed, a few more months of pretending the farm could be saved. Enough for a frightened man to tell himself one life could be traded to spare 3. Her father could not lift his eyes to hers. "If I refuse?" "Then your mother worsens," Wade said. "Your brother loses the place by spring, and your father keeps drinking over what he could not do." "Mercer," Elias muttered, but there was no strength in it. Ruth looked toward the patched roof, the split fence, the barn she had helped mend, while neighbors laughed that a crooked girl was doing a boy's work. She thought of her mother coughing through the night. She thought of Caleb waking hungry in winter. The choice did not feel noble, it felt familiar. All her life she had been asked to become smaller so others could live easier. She reached for the wagon rail. A cry tore through the yard. "No!" Martha stood in the doorway in her nightdress, one hand on the frame, the other red with blood. She looked from Elias to Wade, to the money in Wade's hand, and hope broke plain across her face. "You sell a calf when winter bites," she said to her husband, "not your child?" Elias stepped toward her. "Go back inside." But Martha was staring at Wade now. "What do you want with her?" For the first time, Wade Mercer hesitated. Then he said, 20 years ago, on a freezing road outside Red Hollow, my father left my crippled sister in the snow because she slowed the wagon. Your mother found us before morning. She could not save Lily, but before she buried her, she made me swear that if I ever saw another father cast off a daughter the same way, I would take the girl before the world finished what the father began. The yard went dead silent. Ruth felt the night change around her. Her mother had never spoken of Red Hollow, never of Wade, never of a dead girl in the snow. Martha's lips trembled. "I told you to protect her," she whispered. "Not buy her." Wade looked at Elias. "He named the price." Ruth turned to her father. There was misery in his face and fear, and something worse than both, relief that the bargain had already moved beyond him. She climbed into the wagon. Martha made a sound like something tearing. Wade tossed the purse. It struck Elias in the chest and fell into the dirt. Then the wagon rolled away from the only home Ruth had ever known. When she looked back once, she saw her mother sinking to her knees in the doorway, and her father still standing over the money as if he no longer knew whether to pick it up or bury it. They rode west through moonrise without speaking. The road jarred Ruth's bad leg until pain climbed her hip and settled there like a nail, but she would not ask him to slow. Pride was the only thing her father had not managed to sell. Near midnight, Wade pulled beside a dry wash and handed her a canteen. "Drink." She did, then asked, "What happens when we reach your place?" "You eat, sleep, work if you want, leave if you can make it safe." She stared at him. "That is not what men pay for." "No." "Then why take me at all?" He looked toward the dark hills. "Because once men decide a girl is useless, every kind of scavenger comes sniffing. Your father would have sold you to the next man, maybe for less." The truth of it made her colder than the night. She could have thrown herself from the wagon at the next bend. She could have crawled home through cactus and moonlight and forced her father to look at what he had done. But every road from that thought ended at her mother's lungs, her brother's empty plate, and the sagging roof. So she stayed seated, not because she trusted Wade Mercer, but because there was still love enough in her to choose sacrifice over pride. At dawn they reached Black Mesa, where the land rose in broken shelves of stone and greasewood. Wade's ranch sat in a narrow basin below a spring and a stand of cottonwoods built more for defense than comfort. On the porch waited a gray-haired woman in a blue shawl with a shotgun resting easy in her arm. "This is Lupe," Wade said. Lupe studied Ruth's dragging step, then her face. "Come in before your bones turn to dust." Inside, the house smelled of coffee, mesquite smoke, and saddle soap. It did not feel like a prison. That unsettled Ruth more than bars would have. Lupe fed her eggs, broth, and biscuits. Wade went to the corrals as if the strange girl he had paid for were no more urgent than a lame gelding. By noon, Ruth had learned enough to distrust the place in a different way. No locked room, no bridal dress, no laughter from drunken men, only work, watchfulness, and the silence of a house used to danger. Lupe mended tack while Ruth shelled beans. "You fear him?" Lupe said. "Yes." "Good. He has earned fear, but not from you." That answer stayed with Ruth. Near sunset, a young rider came hard from the east, said something quick to Wade in Spanish, and left just as fast. Wade's face went still. "Who was that?" Ruth asked. "News." "What kind?" "The kind that starts trouble." She followed him to the barn. "My mother knew you." "Why?" He checked a saddle girth before answering. "She buried my sister." "That cannot be all." "No," he said, "it isn't." At last he looked at her. "After Lily died, I found the man who left her. I buried him too. Your mother saw what revenge turned me into. Before she married your father, she made me promise that if I ever crossed her path again, I would choose protection over blood if I could." "If you could." That was the bargain. Ruth thought of every story she had heard about Wade Mercer. Barns burned, squatters beaten off water, a deputy once sent home with both wrists broken after he whipped a stable boy. She had never imagined the man inside those stories might spend his life choosing which part of himself to obey. The next morning, the rumor began walking. A peddler stopped for water and saw Ruth on the porch. By evening, Red Wash knew Wade Mercer had bought Elias Larkin's lame daughter. The story changed shape with every telling. Some said he wanted a cheap wife. Some said a servant no one would miss. Others laughed that Elias had finally unloaded his burden. Elias heard the laughter in the saloon and struck a man for repeating it. 3 others struck back. By dawn he sat outside the livery with a split lip, the purse untouched beside him, while Sheriff Tom Braddock stood over him wearing a face full of concern. "Did Mercer force you?" Braddock asked. "No." "Did he take the girl against her will?" Elias said nothing. Across the street, Amos Reddin watched from his mercantile porch. He owned half the grazing land east of town and had wanted the spring under Black Mesa for years. A lawful excuse to remove Wade Mercer would have suited him nicely. By afternoon, Braddock came to the Larkins' place with paper and ink. Martha, feverish and weak, heard every word from her bed. Caleb stood in the doorway gripping a hoe handle like a spear. "If Mercer bought the girl under pressure," Braddock said, "the court can call it kidnapping. Sign here, Elias, and I'll bring her back." Martha said from the bedroom, "He sold her. Put that on the paper too." Braddock ignored her. Reddin stepped onto the porch, bright watch chain against his vest. "A father may make mistakes in hardship," he said. "A decent town helps him correct them." Elias stared at the page.
If he signed, he might get Ruth back. He might also bury his shame under the word rescue. Martha dragged herself to the doorway, white as death. "If you bring lawmen to that ranch," she said, "you will not save her. You will deliver her into a war you do not understand." Reddin smiled without warmth. War has already come. At Black Mesa, Wade saddled extra horses. Lupe filled sacks with cartridges and jerky. Ruth watched their quiet speed and felt the air tighten. "How many are coming?" she asked. Wade checked his revolver. "Enough." Then a rifle flashed from the ridge above the spring. The shot shattered the kitchen window over Ruth's shoulder. Glass burst across the floor. Lupe dragged Ruth down before the second shot punched through the wall. Outside, horses screamed in the corral.
Wade was already moving, rifle in hand, dropping behind the stone trough near the spring. Men spread along the ridge above the basin, dark against the noon sky. Some wore deputy stars, others wore no law at all. Sheriff Braddock's voice carried down first. "Wade Mercer, surrender the girl and your weapons." Then came Reddin's smoother call. "Do it clean, Mercer. No need for blood." Wade fired before the echo died. One rider pitched backward out of sight. "So much for clean," Lupe muttered, shoving cartridges at Ruth. "Stay low." Smoke from the shattered lamp wick mixed with dust and powder. Bullets chipped stone and tore through corral rails. A mule brayed in panic. "Why are they really here?" Ruth shouted. "Because Braddock wants a hanging," Lupe said, peering through the broken window. "Reddin wants the spring. Men like that prefer a holy reason before they steal." Braddock called again. "Girl, if he's holding you against your will, come into the yard." Ruth almost laughed at the lie. Crawling to the doorway, she saw the basin laid bare in hard light. Wade crouched behind the trough, 3 horses stamped in the lean-to, and at the far fence line between 2 deputies sat her father. He had brought them here. She had imagined regret, if it ever came, would look like grief. Instead, it looked like obedience. Elias sat among the men who meant to use her, hat crushed in his hands, waiting for someone else to tell him what kind of father he had been. That hurt worse than the shots. It meant the sale had not ended in the yard. It had only put on badges. Wade saw her looking. Inside. She did not move. Elias lifted a hand, then let it fall when Reddin bent toward him and spoke. The next hour stretched like wire. Time lost shape. Smoke crawled through the rooms. Dry plaster dust coated Ruth's tongue until even swallowing hurt. Each pause between shots felt too short to breathe and too long to endure. She began to know the sound of every rifle on the ridge and the rhythm of Wade's answers from the trough outside, like listening to a storm argue with a cliff. Lupe moved through the house with terrible calm, loading rifles, dragging water away from windows, cursing under her breath. Ruth helped because fear needed somewhere to go. She held a horse by the nose while bullets whined over the roof, and bandaged Wade's arm when he came in for cartridges. At last Braddock raised a white cloth. "Parley!" Wade stepped into the yard with his rifle lowered but ready. Braddock and Reddin rode down alone. Elias followed on foot, hat crushed in both hands. From the doorway, Ruth watched them meet halfway between house and spring, the basin so quiet she could hear cottonwood leaves shaking. Braddock spoke first. "This ends easy. The girl says she came unwilling, we take you in, and the court decides the rest." "And if she says otherwise?" Wade asked. Reddin smiled. "Then perhaps we discuss old claims. Strange papers have a way of surfacing when men sit on a spring that ought to belong elsewhere." So that was the deeper rot. Black Mesa's water was worth more than any lie they could write around her. She understood then that her body had become a deed, Men were trying to sign over in public. If she stepped wrong, they would call it law. If she wept, they would call it proof. If she spoke, they would call it fear and keep riding past her anyway. Elias stepped forward. "Ruth, come home. I made a mistake." The words should have mattered. Instead, they fell dead. Home was the place where he had named her price. "Did you sign their paper?" she asked. He hesitated. "I was trying to fix it," he said. "No," she thought. "You were trying to hide it." Reddin turned toward her, all polished gentleness. "Miss Larkin, step away from Mercer and tell these men the truth." Wade did not look back at her. "Choose for yourself. Not for me." It would have been easier if he had begged. Before she could speak, a shot rang from the ridge. It was not Wade's. Reddin's horse screamed and reared. On the rocks above the deputies stood Caleb Larkin, thin as a fence rail, clutching an old farm rifle. He had followed the lawman west without being seen. Chaos shattered the truce. Deputies grabbed for reins. Somebody fired wild. Elias threw up his hands. Wade lunged toward Ruth as Lupe yanked her from the doorway. Then flames leapt from the barn roof. Orange fire raced the dry shingles. Smoke rolled over the basin. Horses kicked in terror. "Backwash!" Wade shouted. He drove Ruth behind the house as bullets ripped through the porch. Lupe came after them with a shotgun and 2 saddlebags. Caleb slid down the slope toward them while deputies yelled for him to stop. Elias stood in the open between the burning barn and the armed men, turning helplessly toward daughter, son, and law alike. Reddin leveled his revolver at Ruth. "Bring her out," he shouted through the smoke, "or I shoot the boy first." Caleb froze in the ash-grey light, 30 yards from safety, with rifles aimed at his chest. Wade stepped out from the corner of the house before Ruth could move. Smoke streamed behind him. "Let the boy walk," he said. "Give me the girl," Reddin answered. "No." Braddock shouted for order, but fear had made everyone stupid. Ruth saw the moment Elias understood what his bargain had summoned. Not gossip, but wolves with badges, willing to shoot his son to justify theft. He moved without warning. Elias hit Reddin's gun arm. The shot went wide.
Wade fired from the hip and dropped one of Reddin's riders. Caleb ran. Lupe blasted both barrels over the deputies' heads, buying 1 hard second of confusion. Then they were all moving at once. Ruth dragged by Wade into the dry wash, Caleb stumbling beside them, Elias following, with blood running down his temple where Reddin's pistol had struck him. They fled through twisting gullies into broken lava country where horses could not follow fast. By dusk they reached a slot canyon with a half-collapsed line shack tucked under stone. Lupe had peeled away to draw pursuit. Wade barred the door, then sank heavily to the floor. Only then did Ruth see how much blood he had lost. The earlier wound had torn open from shoulder to elbow. "Sit still," she said. He gave a breath of a laugh.
"You order quickly. I learned from desperate men." Caleb brought water with shaking hands. Elias stood near the door, as if the shack itself had judged him and found him lacking. Ruth cut Wade's sleeve, cleaned the wound, and wrapped it tight. He never flinched. Men who learn pain too early usually did not. Outside, the wind moved through the canyon mouth. The world shrank to lamplight, stone, blood, and dust. Caleb sat close to Ruth. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "Ma sent me after them. I didn't know what Pa did till Braddock came with paper." Ruth touched his hair once. It was the first gentle thing she had done all day, and it nearly undid her. Across the shack, Elias sat on an upturned crate, staring at his hands. "Your mother told me never to send for Mercer," he said. "I thought she meant shame. I didn't know Reddin would use you for the spring." Wade leaned against the wall. "You knew enough." No one answered that. After a long silence, Ruth said, "Tell me about Lily." Wade studied her, then said, "She was 12, small. Her leg turned inward. She walked slow and fell often. My father drank through 2 winters and decided feed or to go to horses that could pull. We were moving after a storm. Lily couldn't climb into the wagon fast enough. He drove off. I ran back for her. By then the drifts were over her waist. Your mother was traveling with a church wagon. She carried Lily under blankets all night, singing to keep her awake. By morning, the child was gone." The lamp hissed softly. For the first time since childhood, Ruth remembered her mother brushing her hair on summer evenings and saying that a crooked branch could still bear fruit if no fool cut it down first. She had never understood why Martha always said it while staring into the yard instead of at the orchard. Now she did. "Your mother looked at me over that little body," Wade said, "and told me I was not my father's sin. Then she made me swear that if the Lord ever put another cast-off girl in my reach, I was to stand between her and the grave, even if the world called me a devil for it." Ruth had spent years believing her life was an inconvenience others endured. Now she understood that her mother had seen her clearly long before this night, and feared not Wade himself, but the violence that followed him.
Elias bowed his head. "I did it," he said. "Everything that man did on the snow road I did with a purse in my hand. I told myself it was for medicine, for Caleb, for the farm. Truth is, I was tired. Tired of debt, tired of talk, tired of defending what I should have defended without being asked." He looked smaller than Ruth had ever seen him. "I know," she said. The words were not forgiveness. They cut him anyway. Outside, Elias made a low sound that was almost a sob, and Wade turned his face aside to grant him what little dignity remained. Later, after Caleb slept and Elias took watch outside, Ruth found Wade awake, staring at the lamp flame. "You could have left us," she said. "I tried that once with someone else." "You mean your sister?" He nodded. Ruth stretched out her bad leg.
"When I was 10, boys tied a tin cup to my boot and followed me laughing till I fell in the mud. My father made them apologize because my mother saw. If she hadn't, he would have told me to ignore it. He always thought pain was cheaper if you pretended not to feel it." Wade looked at her. "And what do you think?" "That pain unpaid becomes debt," she said. "It comes due somewhere." A shadow of grim approval touched his face. Near dawn, the canyon turned blue. Ruth brewed coffee over a tiny flame. For a little while, the wreck of their lives almost resembled mourning. Then a rifle cracked from the canyon rim. The bullet struck the tin cup from Ruth's hand and sent it spinning into the dust. Reddin had found the shack. Bullets hammered the shack walls and shook dirt through the roof boards. Caleb dropped flat. Elias dragged him behind the water barrel. Wade seized his rifle and kicked open the back hatch. "They'll roll us from both sides," he said. "We move now." "No," Ruth answered. 3 heads turned. She stared at the canyon mouth where morning light poured over the stone. They want a story, she said. A lawman rescuing the helpless girl, a cattleman protecting the county from an outlaw. If we keep running, they get to write it. Wade's jaw hardened. This is not the hour for speeches. It is the hour to make them hear the truth. Reddin's voice boomed from the rim. Mercer! Send out the girl and the boy, and I may spare the father. Ruth looked at Elias. Will you stand where you should have stood yesterday? This time he did not look away. Yes. Ruth stepped from the shack into the open wash. Ruth! Caleb shouted. Wade cursed and came after her, stopping only when she lifted one hand. Don't! The canyon fell quiet. Men on the rim shifted for a cleaner shot, uncertain now that their victim had chosen the center of the stage. Dust moved around Ruth's skirts. Her bad leg shook, but she locked it straight and faced the heights. I came to Black Mesa by my own word, she called. My father sold me. Wade Mercer did not steal me. Sheriff Braddock wrote a lie. Amos Reddin brought rifles to make it true. Her voice struck the stone and came back larger. Braddock rose first on the rim. Girl, you are frightened and confused. No, Ruth said. You are. She pointed toward Reddin. He wants the spring. He used me because men will march behind any thief who says he is defending a woman. Ask him why he came without a warrant. Ask why he brought hired guns with deputies. Ask why he aimed at a 14-year-old boy. For one breath, nothing happened. Then another voice rang from below the east wall. I will ask it. All heads turned. Lupe rode into the wash with half a dozen homesteaders. Reddin had cheated on water lines for years. Behind them, pale but upright in a borrowed wagon, sat Martha Larkin, wrapped in quilts. Reddin swore. Braddock's face blanched. Martha lifted a leather packet. Tom Braddock, you brought a false paper to my porch. Amos Reddin, you came for a spring that was never yours.
I kept the survey copy from 20 years ago because I knew greed would one day call itself law. Reddin fired first. The shot meant for Martha struck Elias instead. He had stepped in front of the wagon without thinking. The bullet hit beneath his ribs. He staggered, almost puzzled, then fell to his knees in the wash. Everything broke loose. Wade fired from behind Ruth and dropped one of Reddin's riflemen on the rim. Lupe's homesteaders answered from below. Deputies scattered, some ducking, some throwing down their stars. Braddock ran for cover and caught a bullet through the shoulder from one of his own men. Ruth dropped beside her father. Blood spread hot through his shirt. No, she whispered, though she knew the sound of a mortal wound. Elias caught weakly at her sleeve.
Listen! Gunfire cracked above them, farther off now. I sold the wrong thing, he said. Tears blurred her sight. Not you, me. I sold what was left of the man your mother thought she married. He swallowed hard. I heard them call you burden so long I let it save me from defending you. I am sorry. At last there was nothing in him but truth. Ruth held his hand. She could not give him a lie he had not earned. She gave him this. I know. His face loosened, seen if not absolved. He died with her hand in his. When she looked up, the fight was ending. Reddin was trying to mount a horse at the far rim, blood on his collar. Wade Mercer crossed the wash toward him with the calm of weather. Don't, Ruth said. He stopped. Every story told about Wade would have ended with a killing then. Reddin deserved it. The canyon expected it. Even the wind seemed to wait. Wade looked at Martha in the wagon, at Caleb kneeling beside Elias's body, at Ruth standing in the dust with grief burning through her. Then he lowered the rifle. "Take him alive!" The homesteaders swarmed Reddin. Braddock, bleeding and cursing, was bound beside him. The survey packet passed into steady hands, and within minutes the truth lay open in faded ink. The spring belonged to Black Mesa, and Reddin had spent years trying to bury the claim beneath threats and forged notices. By noon they rode to town with prisoners, witnesses, and proof. By sunset, Braddock was stripped, Reddin chained, and the spring deed recorded. Elias was buried 3 days later, on a rise overlooking the Larkins' place. Martha stood between Ruth and Caleb through the service, one frail hand holding both of theirs. When the preacher finished, Wade remained by the fresh earth with his hat in his hands. "Your mother's promise is paid," he said. Ruth looked over the wind-bent grass. "No," she answered. It changed. He glanced at her. "You took me from a sale, that is done, but Caleb and my mother still need help through winter. The farm needs mending, and Black Mesa needs someone who can keep books and speak plainly to men who lie. If you still mean protection over blood, don't ride away yet." Something in his face eased by a fraction. "All right." So it was settled, without ceremony. Caleb spent spring learning horses at Black Mesa. Martha grew strong enough to sit in sunlight again. Ruth kept the ranch books sharper than any banker liked, and learned that usefulness had never been the measure. Truth had. Years later, the town still told the story badly. Ruth kept only the parts worth keeping. Caleb's laugh returning, her mother in sunlight, Lupe teaching her to shoot, and Wade at the fence line, slowly learning that restraint could be its own kind of vengeance. When the wind moved through the cottonwoods at the old place, Ruth no longer saw the night she had been sold. She saw the night the lie about her life had ended. Last light burned on the mesa, and a lone rider turned homeward beneath a sky wide enough to forgive nothing and still hold everything.